Welcome to the CURES show and podcast where we explore the cutting edge of wellness for our mind, body, and spirit. I'm Kara Sundlin. There has been so much information circulating about supplements and lifestyle changes that we can treat ADHD with on the internet. And some people even promise they can cure it. So what really works? Today, we're talking about that and also a cutting edge DNA test you can buy right on Amazon to learn what your brain needs to work best. Here to help us sort through it all is naturopathic doctor Jennifer Stagg. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I love, in case people don't know why I would have you here, naturopathic doctors are really the only people who go to med school to really hone in on prevention and treatment with nutraceuticals, with supplements, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like that's something that we learn in addition to understanding all conventional medicine and pharmaceuticals. Yeah.
So there's so much, and let's just start with ADHD can get confused as far as even what the signs and symptoms are, because you'll hear people say, oh, everyone's a little ADHD, but this is different. We're talking about an actual condition that can really manifest, especially for kids. I know this is a big deal for back to school right now, how kids might be struggling and parents deciding, do I medicate, do I not? What are the symptoms that you are most concerned about?
Yeah, so I mean, an official diagnosis needs to be done through a pediatrician or neuropsychologist, and it is a series of questions that are filled out for kids anyway, filled out by parents and often the school, and you have to meet a number, like 6 different diagnostic criteria, things like, you know, trouble paying attention, fidgeting, and certainly there's different types, kind of sub-profiles of ADHD, but the basic diagnostic criteria kind of carries over to everyone.
And not everyone, especially girls, may not have the hyperactivity part, so that can be a little confusing. They might have more the inattentive, dreamy, daydreamy part.
Yeah.
But this is where we're going to talk to. This is where you can really hone in, because whether or not you choose to medicate, what we're going to talk about today are some supplements and nutraceuticals that can still make a huge difference, maybe even keep your doses lower.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So these are, for the most part, most of the supplements we'll talk about are totally safe, that you could take it along with medication that is for ADHD. Now, of course, with ADHD, there's a higher risk of having other what we call comorbidities, so like anxiety or depression. So then if someone is on an antidepressant as well, then sometimes there's a little bit of crossover with really specialized formulas where you don't want to affect serotonin levels too much. So that's really the thing to be concerned about. But if we're just talking about basic nutrients, like we're going to talk about vitamin D and minerals, those are going to be completely safe with really any medication.
So let's go through. We've got a few supplements, omega-3s, we've got vitamin D, magnesium. So let's start with omega-3s. This is something that are essential fatty acids, and you would recommend this to anyone with ADHD.
Yeah, absolutely. So there have been really great studies done on fish oil and ADHD, people who have ADHD, showing that they have lower levels of omega-3s, and then also then supplementing those individuals and seeing an improvement in ADHD symptoms. So great evidence there. And when it comes to fish oil, you really want to buy something that has high levels of EPA and DHA. And both of those are going to nourish the brain, especially the DHA. So when we think about omega-3s, the dosing would be different for like a child versus an adult. And so like little kids, we'd often do a liquid, or sometimes we have really high concentrate chewables.
Okay.
This would be more of an adult sized omega-3. So, you know, a lot of people have those really big fish oil capsules.
Yeah, so I have the really big ones at home, but this is, and because this is something that, you know, we all need healthy brains, and there's, I guess, we've done so many stories about all of us needing essential fatty acids, hence why they're essential. But I'm just going to show people that this is one brand that you like. It's by Metagenics.
Yeah.
Right? So
that one has 1,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA in one capsule, which is highly concentrated. So this like allows us to be able to recommend lower like numbers of capsules to people.
So you can just take one of these instead of having to take 4.
Probably for an adult would be an appropriate dose. Exactly.
Because sometimes if you just get the gummies or something like that,
they can be really low. You could see some of these I pick up and look at health food stores or the grocery store, and it has, you know, 30 or 40 milligrams of the types of omega-3s that
Which,
we need.
not that it's not good for you, but that's not a therapeutic dose for ADHD. You're not going to notice anything.
No,
okay.
Absolutely.
How long, if you, let's just say, you want to say, I'm going to start taking this, there's no downside. How long until you notice a difference, and what would you see?
Yeah, so usually with something like this, we're talking like 4 to 6 weeks at least to have your brain responding to omega-3 supplementation.
Is there a way to determine if we actually need it or we're already good?
Yeah, so there are a number of different ways. So you can get it done through a blood test that you would just order through Quest. So an omega check, which is, you'd have to ask really specifically for an omega-3 test. It's not done on annual blood work for sure. And then there are little like finger prick kits, like this one right here that we have.
Okay, so I've seen these kind of things. So this,
yeah, you could do a little home test. Yeah.
And you just prick your finger, and then it tells you where to send it, and it'll determine. Now, if you're really good, and I don't know, maybe you eat a lot of fish or whatever, then would you not supplement, or you would still benefit?
Well, so for someone who thinks they're getting a lot of omega-3s and they're like, well, I don't think I need it because I'm eating a lot in my diet, this would be a great indicator to test, right? Yeah. To find out, okay, well, yeah, you are good versus you still need omega-3s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if it shows you're good, then you wouldn't necessarily supplement
then we
more.
would definitely be thinking about the other things which we're thinking about anyway. But maybe we just like don't even need to supplement with omega-3s for that.
Okay,
yep.
So that's what's really cool is there's really emerging science about not only are doctors from naturopathic doctors and MDs starting to agree, even psychiatrists, on needing omega-3s for our brain and also even preventing Alzheimer's. I hear so much about that, but we might be able to test with it, so that's great.
Yeah.
The next thing would be magnesium. I often see on the internet, this is like the supplement everyone needs to take, magnesium, but specifically for ADHD.
Yeah, so for ADHD, it's a high rate of deficiency seen in people who have ADHD, people who are diagnosed with ADHD. And there's also research showing that it helps when we supplement those patients. So you, again, can do a test, and usually most magnesium testing that gets done is just a straight up serum magnesium, and that often doesn't pick up a true magnesium deficiency like in the cell. So we use what's called a red blood cell magnesium level, and that is something you could do through a local, like a Quest lab, that you don't need to have an advanced lab panel in order to get that information. And then if it comes back as low, then certainly like supplementing is really important. And then there are different types of magnesium, of course.
So just to get it clear, 95 to 100% of people with ADHD are deficient?
Yeah, so it's pretty high. Dr. Greenblatt, who is an excellent ADHD specialist, psychiatrist, in his practice, this information comes from his practice, when he tests ADHD patients, 95 to almost 100%, he says, like, are magnesium deficient.
And again, you're going to take this magnesium, and it could be in addition to the medication you're taking. It's not going to hurt that.
Yeah.
It just might help you, and maybe you won't have to go up as much on your medication.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so so we can test. And what about the types? Because you go to the store and there's all different kinds of magnesium.
There's a lot of different, like what we call chelates of magnesium. So something like magnesium oxide doesn't get absorbed very well. So that's often like a cheap, really like a cheap available form of magnesium that you'll see. And so you go up a couple of levels, and we're thinking about things like magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate. We like magnesium glycinate a lot because glycine is also calming to the brain, and it does have a better absorption rate. And then the highest absorption that gets into the brain is something called magnesium threonate, or magtine, so like Neuromag here.
Neuromag, and that's created by Designs for Health, which is a local Connecticut company, but they sell to doctors all over.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're wondering, I mean, I know you run Whole Health, your practice, but whether you go to someone like Dr. Stagg or wherever you're watching this from, you want either a naturopathic doctor or a functional doctor who's going to do this kind of testing.
Yeah.
Or you can ask.
Typically, you can ask. So you could ask your provider, your current healthcare provider, to run all of these tests, and then certainly then you could try to just address everything on your own. But of course, it's easier if you have a professional helping you out.
Okay, so what specific test, though, would we ask for magnesium? You said
Yeah, so a red blood cell magnesium.
Red blood cell magnesium. Okay, so we're going to move on to zinc.
Yep.
All right, zinc is also tends to be lower in people with ADHD.
Yeah, so zinc is definitely lower in ADHD, been shown to be helpful. There's also this relationship between zinc and copper, and so copper is something you certainly can test for zinc as well with this red blood cell test. But then copper is something else that we would consider testing for, because if copper levels are high in the body, and this can just come from, you know, too much copper exposure, then it will deplete zinc levels.
Okay.
And so then you need a lot more zinc to sort of balance out the copper.
Okay, so zinc is something that we can safely also just add to this?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and fine with other like medications if you're on other medications.
Okay, and what else would zinc help us with, just other benefits?
It's really great for immunity. So I know a lot of people just on their own, doing their own research over the pandemic, were taking zinc. Like I'd have patients that were new to me coming in, they're like, I'm on zinc and elderberry and vitamin D because this is what's helping me stay healthy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So some of that you might already be doing.
Yeah,
and then this
right.
is, and that's the other thing that we're going to talk about is vitamin D, because that is really helpful.
Yeah,
and all of us here in the Northeast tend to be deficient in our vitamin D.
Right, yeah, for sure. So vitamin D, again, another one of these basic nutritional factors that have shown to be deficient in patients who have ADHD, and then supplementation being effective. There was even a study done where they combined vitamin D with medication, methylphenidate, and saw more improvement compared it to placebo. And saw improvement in ADHD symptoms.
Wait, so say that again. Methylphenidate would be some of the medications?
Would be like a prescription medication for
like
ADHD.
An Adderall.
Yeah, like a Ritalin type of medication,
Okay.
right? A stimulant. And in this study, they took two groups and they compared them. One group took their medicine and vitamin D. The other group took took their medicine and no vitamin D. And the group with the vitamin D had an improvement in ADHD symptoms. And they're already on medicine, right? So this is the thing. Like you can take medicine, it can help you a lot, but maybe you're not like fully better, right? Like you still have some degree of symptoms that you need some support with.
Or what do you do, you know, when parents do this all the time, that the medication works during school, but then they need to come home and do homework. Do they really want to take a second dose? Or how is it helping on the weekends if they take a medication break sometimes?
Right,
or,
yeah.
So this is something,
these are things that could help with just reducing the overall symptoms of patients with ADHD. And then even like on weekends, then we could use something more targeted, like an herbal compound, for example, if we're needing to help with like focus, or something more like, even instead of like coffee is a little too, can be stimulating, but caffeine can be calming to the brain in people who have ADHD. So caffeine has shown to be helpful, but you don't want to load up on coffee caffeine. So a lot of times I'll have people use like green tea or black tea, and they're getting a little bit of caffeine, but then they're getting theanine in there, which is calming to the brain. So that's another kind of strategy. Of course, if you were someone who was caffeine sensitive, you wouldn't want to do that late in the day, right? Like drinking tea too late would be bad.
Yeah, okay, so this is something that you even do with little kids. We've talked about this, that maybe before the parents decide to medicate, you might recommend that they take some black tea in the morning.
Yep, I have done that with patients. Right, exactly. And a lot of cultures around the world, like Americans are really hesitant about giving kids like coffee or tea, which is understandable. Like you don't want a ton of caffeine in the system, but most cultures around the world, like kids are drinking tea at a young age, right?
Okay.
And so it's okay to give some tea to most children.
That does not mean that your kids can then tell you they get to go to Starbucks or Dunkin' and get all these crazy drinks with sugar, because I want to get into that also. Unfortunately, especially when we're talking about young people and adults too, there's a lot of processed food and a lot of sugar, and that is especially problematic really for all humans, but specifically if you have ADHD, regulating those blood sugar levels can make all the difference.
It can. So we really think about nutrition as being integral to any sort of treatment plan. So of course there are supplements we would recommend, but first we're thinking about dietary measures. So increasing the amount of protein in the diet, especially in the morning, because that sets up kind of your blood sugar control for the day. But sugar not only has the effect of increasing, your circulating blood sugar, it also is, and processed foods as well, affecting your microbiome. And so this is where there's a lot of research coming out about ADHD and the microbiome. And so we even think about microbiome testing in ADHD, which seems so strange, right? Like in conventional thought process to think like your brain and what's going on in your gut could be connected. But we
that
know,
gut-brain connection.
Yeah, that gut-brain connection, there's so much research on that now. And so there have been studies looking at using probiotics and prebiotics, and like even prebiotics in infants, reducing or preventing the development of ADHD.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So let's just talk about that's another supplement that is recommended, the probiotics. And the reason simply would be that a healthy gut means your gut is where the neurotransmitters are made, so you'll make better neurotransmitters for your brain.
Right, exactly. So that is part of it. And then there's just like your bacteria in your gut make all these sort of neuropeptides that communicate with your brain. And so even it's such a strange thing that like when people are often having sugar cravings, a lot of that comes from the signals coming from the bacteria in the gut of like, oh, feed me. Like it actually, these bacteria speak to your brain in that way.
Okay, that's what's happening. The bacteria talking every day at 3 o'clock.
Which is like a weird thing to think about.
Okay, so basically, just to do a little review, some of the biggest supplements that you could be adding that are really well studied that can help ADHD would be?
Okay, so omega-3s, magnesium, zinc, vitamin D. Those are the big ones, and iron. We haven't talked about that yet. So iron is also something you can test easily with a simple blood test, and the iron levels tend to be low in people with ADHD. Of course, not everyone. So if you're going to supplement with iron, I really would encourage a blood test here, because having too much iron in your system definitely can be problematic. So that's something, if you're going to be on an iron supplement, should be tested regularly to make sure the levels are not getting too high.
Okay.
Same with vitamin D too. Like those levels could get really high if you're taking too much for too long a period of time.
Most of us would be taking our kids to a pediatrician. And they don't generally do blood work a lot of times for young kids. So how do we approach that?
So that would be like you'd just have to have a conversation that you would want to order some blood tests for a condition, because most of the visits to the pediatrician are just general wellness screening, right? But once you actually have a condition that you're diagnosed with, then that's a different discussion. It's like, can we run some tests about this specific condition?
And sometimes pediatricians are the ones prescribing the ADHD medication, but they're not maybe also recommending the supplements or It doesn't mean that that's not the right thing. It's just in general, the pediatricians wouldn't be trained the way a naturopathic doctor would be trained for this.
Yep, exactly. And you're starting to see some recommendations for probiotics, things like that coming out of pediatricians' offices, and vitamin D, of course, that's something. But certainly it's not a routine test that gets done on wellness screenings.
Okay, so let's talk about food sensitivity. There's a lot on the internet about saying, and this is really hard, as trying to tell your kid what not to eat, when they go to, if they want to eat all the things that other kids eat. It's not good for lots of reasons, but as far as sensitivities to colors and dyes and all of that stuff, and gluten and dairy, sometimes it can be really hard to get your kids to give all of that up. Do we need to do that?
Yeah, so I would say for preservatives and dyes, I often recommend that as a starting place for most families that are approaching it for children, that to reduce these in your diet, and you can often see a really big difference. And I tell them, like, try it for a month or two, see if it makes a difference, and they'll come back routinely and say, oh my God, what a big difference. And then he went to this party and had like yellow dye or red dye, and the symptoms were like much worse again for a few days.
Okay.
And so the preservatives, again, that affects your microbiome. So this is why like ultra processed foods and all the research we're seeing on that related to obesity, it is because it's affecting the microbiome is more where like the mechanism of action is happening.
Yeah, it's not just calories. It's changing our hormones. It's telling us to store fat, or it's causing some hyperactivity for kids that are sensitive.
Absolutely.
Now, there's also the elimination diet, and I know that can be hard for kids, but you recommend, and maybe for adults too, there's some quality food sensitivity testing we could do?
Yep, absolutely. So, like food sensitivities can be an issue here. It's not always an issue. It's not not the first place that we always start, but it can be an issue for kids and adults with ADHD. And so you could go on a really, limited diet, cut out a bunch of foods, and then reintroduce them, which is this elimination and challenge diet, which is really hard to do for a kid and an adult even.
It is. I mean, I've done it before, and I did notice certain things were giving me a migraine, and it was, I used to drink a Diet Coke way in my 20s, and the food journaling revealed, it's the Diet Coke.
Right, yeah.
And I now know I'm super sensitive to artificial sweeteners. I wouldn't have them anymore anyway, but that was the 90s.
Right.
Everyone thought that was healthy. But
so
this
you
could save us. You just do something like this.
So you can just do it. Yeah, this is a finger stick. It's really reliable. The methodology that this company uses really looks at food sensitivities from a gut inflammation standpoint. And of course, anytime there's something going on with inflammation in the gut, that's a big problem, especially in your brain. So this identifies it, and I get these back, and it's also testing for leaky gut or intestinal permeability. It tests for candida overgrowth too, so it's kind of a cool test.
I think we need to do this. KBMOD.
Yeah.
And so KBMODdiagnostics.com.
Massachusetts-based company.
Oh yeah, I see the number right here, 617-933-8130. But okay, so this is something that's relatively local to FIT test.
I found this to be really reliable. I had a patient, we do this for a lot of different reasons, but I had one patient that stood out recently, and she was having diarrhea basically every morning, and we did this testing, and it came back as having coffee and cinnamon as the two, basically nothing but coffee and cinnamon, and she drank cinnamon lattes every day.
Wow.
Who drinks cinnamon lattes? That's uncommon, right? I don't know a lot of people that do that.
Yeah.
It sounds yummy.
Yeah.
But so she cut it out, and her symptoms were completely gone. So you would never figure that out, right? Maybe you cut out coffee, but you probably would never cut out cinnamon.
Right. We always hear that cinnamon is good for us.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next thing, which I think is fascinating, and this is emerging science as well, but there's something called the Genome test. It's a mental health map. I actually had this done for my son at your recommendation. I think I might do it for everyone in the family just because it's interesting. But you can literally order this on Amazon. However, it used to be only available to doctors, and it actually tells us where our brain could use some support, what our risks are, and even what supplements could help.
Yeah, for sure. So you're right. It started out as a physician test called Mindful DNA, and it was looking at, it looked at a wide variety of factors, and it still does. So there are these 7 key areas. But some of the information that we get back that is actionable would include an MTHFR test, which is a methylfolate test. So it's when most people are aware of folic acid.
Yeah.
You think about taking folic acid when you're pregnant, you need to take folate. So once folate gets in the body, it needs to be sort of activated, and that means it's methylated. And there's an enzyme that helps us do that. In some people, and this is just a variant, in some people the enzyme doesn't work very well, so we don't activate our folic acid very well. This test shows that, and that's been linked to a wide variety of cognitive and mood problems. And so the fix for that, the action, is you take the folic acid supplement already methylated. So there's actually something you can do to help with that. And then there are a wide variety of other genes on there as well, another one called COMT, C-O-M-T, that has to do with how neurotransmitters get broken down. So some people have a fast COMT, some people have a slow one. Based on what we see on that test, we can recommend supplements that would help with either direction, so it would balance out the neurotransmitters.
So what's really interesting, especially if you're trying to do this for your kids, I mean, we all want to be mindful of not being wasteful. Also, trying to give kids supplements isn't always the easiest thing. So if you have something to do that can say, okay, listen, looks like you have trouble falling asleep, and it's okay to have a little melatonin, which actually that's something I want to ask you. Kids with ADHD often have trouble sleeping, and you're okay with doing some melatonin. People are like, oh, I don't want to do it every day. I'll get, my body will get used to it.
No, melatonin, so that's an option, and sometimes it's magnesium. There are a number of different things that we can use for sleep, but I'll routinely use any of those in that category for sleep. But on that test, the mental health map test by Genome, it does look at genes related to circadian rhythm and sleep, and so you can identify, oh, this sleep problem is genetically triggered, right? And that's what we know about ADHD. It's a neurodevelopmental condition. It's thought to be a combination of genetic and environmental factors, and so whatever we can do to mitigate genetics, which we know now we can help to turn genes on and off, turn things down based on like environmental triggers.
Well, that's where people get confused. Like, what ADHD is genetic, or part of it is anyway, and there's a lot of diagnoses right now. So what you're saying, it doesn't change the fact that there may be different neural wiring, or that there's a delay in the frontal lobe maturation with the kid, but. Or if you're an adult and you have this. You're not saying that the wiring isn't different. It's just that we actually could, with epigenetics, turn the volume up on our good genes, the volume down on our bad genes. And so taking some of these simple supplements can make a difference. It doesn't change our brain.
No, absolutely. So it doesn't change the actual wiring in your genetics, but it changes how genes get expressed. And we used to think like genes were set in stone, there's nothing you can do about it. If you're, and now we know, like someone who has diabetes, for example, or genes for diabetes they're not destined to have diabetes. You can actually turn off certain genes specifically just with a Mediterranean diet, like completely turn off that risk, which is so fascinating, right?
Right. And there's that Netflix series right now about the blue zones, about like, there's places that exist that don't even have these chronic diseases. So at least with ADHD, we've got about 3 minutes left, but so basically the best thing to do, you get your vitamin D tested from your world, you'd like to see it at least at 50.
Yep, absolutely. So we're looking for that range of 50 to 80. We don't want it to go too high, because too high a level of vitamin D can be toxic, as we talked about, but testing is really key there.
But to just start, if you go to the store and get some good vitamin D, which again, we want quality, but if you were to do that, would you start
with a 2,000 for most people. Like the Canadian government recommends 2,000 for like everyone, basically. And we're pretty close to the border, that like in terms of our latitude, we're pretty northern.
Well, that's what's so interesting too, is you can read into this, and there are a lot of these food dyes and a lot of things in our food that aren't allowed in Europe, aren't allowed in Canada. And like, we talk about the Canadian government coming out and recommending vitamin D for everyone there. We don't do that. It doesn't mean that that we don't need it. It's just not what we do here. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just we're not getting a lot of information. So that's what we're trying to do here, is let people know what really works. Omega-3s, if you were to just pick one, would you start with the omega-3s?
Yeah, I probably would, just because it's so critical for brain health, and it makes such a big difference, like for everything, I would say.
And even for all of us who are aging and preventing Alzheimer's, like, do you take an omega-3?
Yeah, absolutely.
Every day.
Yeah.
Do you take a vitamin D every day?
I do.
And then it's not for ADHD, it's just for brain good health.
It's just like basic, but it also, like all of these things are going to help not only with ADHD, it helps with all the cellular function, like all those biochemical reactions that are going on in your body. Use these cofactors to catalyze the reaction. So it helps not only with brain health, it's going to help pretty much keep you healthy, right?
Okay, so then a good probiotic, which that's in our final minute, the psychobiotics, creating our gut together. So we've got omega-3s, vitamin D, zinc, and a probiotic. Sometimes in your multi, there's going to be enough zinc, but these are all things that, again, you can test. Check out the GenoMind test. Again, you can look at that right on Amazon.
Yep, that's direct to consumer, so you can just order it yourself. And you do, like, even if you're not working with a healthcare provider, that company does offer a 30-minute, like, consultation, too, to help you understand, like, the results of the test, and it, like, offers a lot of sort of actionable steps.
I thought it was so cool.
I
got it for one family member. I feel like we need it for everybody now. And I have noticed sleeping better with my magnesium glycinate, just for us women who also have tough time falling asleep. So so give it to the kids and give it to yourself. But anyway, Dr. Stagg, thank you so much. I want to let everyone know they can also see you. I know, check out, you've got a whole practice, Whole Health in Farmington, so you check it out. Follow her on @Dr. Stagg on Instagram. Have a great day, everyone. And if this was helpful, please like and share. Be well.